So recall your motivation and generate compassion for all those beings, including ourselves, who are under the control of afflictions and karma, who desperately are trying to be happy, but either by not knowing the causes of happiness and the causes of suffering, or by knowing them, but our mind being out of control, then not being able to create the causes for happiness and abandon the causes of suffering. And see that that's our equal situation for all of us in cyclic existence. Nobody's better, nobody's worse. So if we value our own well-being, considering that others are equal to us, considering that they've been kind to us, let's also work for their well-being. And in order to do that, we have to free ourselves from the afflictions, the cognitive obscurations. Otherwise, it's one stumbling person overwhelmed by afflictions and karma trying to lead another stumbling person overwhelmed by afflictions and karma. So we really have to purify our mind, gain all the good qualities, so that the help we offer can be real help. So with that kind of motivation, then let's listen to the teachings on how to progress on the path to full awakening. We finished the 7 awakening factor. No, we're starting the 7 awakening factors. Okay, so we talked about the 4 foundations of mindfulness, how they lead us to the 4 supreme strivings, which lead us to the 4 bases of supernormal power, which is concentration, which lead us to the 5 faculties and 5 powers. Okay, and so we're noticing some very reoccurring themes in all of these. Yeah, it's interesting to make a chart and see how many times mindfulness comes up in the 37. See how many times concentration comes up, how many times different forms of effort come up, how many times different forms of wisdom come up. Yeah, and then we really, can see the essential points very clearly. Okay, so the 7 awakening factors are called correct because they have been transformed into the Arya path. So here we're talking about them as they're practiced by those who have realized selflessness, or from the Pali viewpoint, those who have realized nirvana directly. Okay, so factors indicate that they're causes of awakening. So first one, our friend, mindfulness. Okay, so mindfulness enables the mind to retain the meditation object in mind without forgetfulness and to subdue afflictions. Okay, so here it's really talking about mindfulness as connected with concentration. But as we know from before, mindfulness is also connected to wisdom. Then discrimination of phenomena, is a wisdom, here we come with wisdom again, that clearly knows what to practice and what to abandon. It understands selflessness with wisdom and thus destroys obscurations. So the wisdom knowing what to practice and what to abandon is the wisdom knowing conventional truths, how things functions, how karma functions, and the wisdom that understands selflessness knows the ultimate truth, how things actually exist, and that has the ability to overcome all defilements. So here the discrimination of phenomena is referring to both kinds of wisdom. Okay. Then our friend effort stabilizes renunciation, enabling us to attain awakening quickly. Okay, so effort is necessary for all these things, not just to gain different understandings and qualities, but also to stabilize them. Yeah, because we can gain something, but if we don't put effort into maintaining it, it can decrease. Okay, so here effort has to be joyous. It has to be enthusiastic. It's not, oh, I gotta make effort. Yeah, because none of us like to, that kind of effort, It's like, oh, I gotta do the dishes. Oh, I gotta get out of bed. We don't want to practice the path with that kind of attitude. So it's got to be a joyful effort because we know we're doing something good. We know we're going in a good direction and we'll have a good result. Okay, so that can imbue our mind with a sense of enthusiasm and joy. 4 is rapture. Rapture is one of the jhanic factors. We touched on it briefly on the first day when we talked about the 5 jhanic factors. I just mentioned them quite briefly. So rapture is one of them. So it makes the mind continually happy, benefiting the body and mind. Okay. Then the 5th one is pliancy. Yeah, and it removes all mental and physical discomfort and unserviceability, making the body and mind flexible, blissful, and capable of engaging in virtue. Yeah, so pliancy is really nice, because right now our body and mind are not so serviceable, are they? Our body, this hurts, that hurts, I can't sit in Vajra position. Everything, or the body is not cooperating so well. With physical pliancy, the body is just very comfortable. Okay, similar with mental pliancy, the mind is very responsive. Yeah, whatever situation comes up, it's responsive, it's flexible. Okay, it can adapt. Okay, then so you can see here we're talking a lot about concentration between rapture and pliancy. And then the 6th one is concentration, which here abides single-pointedly on a chosen object of meditation, enabling us to fulfill all our wishes by developing awakened qualities. Because to develop qualities, we have to be able to keep the mind focused on what we're meditating on. Our monkey mind, it's difficult to develop good qualities because no sooner do we have some experience than, we're off thinking about something else. Okay. Then the 7th one is equanimity. Enables us to adopt what is to be practiced and avoid what is to be abandoned. This mental factor of equanimity is free from the faults impeding serenity and is the opposite of the unbalanced mind of affliction. Okay, so when there's afflictions in our mind is not equanimous, it's unbalanced. Yeah, we experience this on a daily basis, don't we? We get upset about or irritated, or aggravated or desiring or something. The mind is not balanced. It's, equanimity brings balance to the mind, peace to the mind. The Buddha explains how the cultivation of the 4 establishments of mindfulness fulfills the 7 awakening factors. So here, seeing the relationships between these different sets. When we contemplate the body as a body, we arouse strong mindfulness, develop it, and bring it to fulfillment. Based on this, we investigate and examine bodily phenomena and their impermanence by means of the 2nd awakening factor, discrimination of phenomena. Probing with such discrimination boosts our 3rd awakening factor, effort, because discrimination brings understanding, which inspires deeper practice. So here, discrimination is seen as something virtuous. In English, the word discrimination has all sorts of connotations. Here, it has a very positive one. We can discriminate one thing for another. Tell what exists and what doesn't exist, what to practice, what to abandon. Okay? So it doesn't refer to discrimination like, I like this and I don't like that. Okay. Then effort leads to the 4th one, which is rapture, flooding the body from head to toe. Because of the ecstasy of rapture can be a little bit agitating, it must be refined and brought to fulfillment. Doing this leads to the 5th one, pliancy, which is tranquility of body and mind. As pliancy develops, it is brought to fulfillment and bliss increases. Bliss and pliancy together enable the mind to settle on the object with more stillness, thus deepening the 6th one, concentration. Once concentration is firm, the mind naturally abides in equanimity. Okay. When we employ the 7 awakening factors to attain true knowledge of the 4 truths and liberation, we then employ the 7 awakening factors to attain true knowledge of the 4 truths and liberation. Within equanimity, we strengthen discrimination of phenomena so that it becomes wisdom supported by single-pointed concentration. By investigating the nature of phenomena, especially the 3 characteristics, we eventually break through and perceive nirvana, at which point all 7 awakening factors are present. Okay, so that's how it's presented in the Pali tradition. Then the Noble Eightfold Path. So the 8 parts of the Noble Eightfold Path are Arya's paths. So this is the description of them as Arya paths. We'll talk a little bit later about them as practices for us ordinary beings. So in the Sanskrit tradition, the Eightfold Noble Path can be divided into 4 branches. It also can be divided into the 3 higher trainings. Okay, but here it's talking about 4 branches. So the first of the paths is right view, and it refers to realizing during post-meditation periods the correct understanding of the 4 truths that was realized in meditative equipoise. It constitutes the first of the 4 branches, the branch of affirmation, because it affirms the realization of emptiness that occurred during meditative equipoise. Okay, so as we're unifying serenity and insight, then the mind perceives, it realizes emptiness, and then it can realize emptiness directly, what we call the Arya's meditative equipoise on emptiness. And so that is, the realization of emptiness when we come out of that meditative state. Yeah, then right view realizes the correct view at that time in terms of it, when you're in meditative equipoise, you're realizing it directly, especially selflessness and impermanence and all these things. Here, you're bringing it into you're realizing it, but not directly, because you're not in that subtle state of mind with the unity of serenity and insight. You're walking around, your conceptual mind is operating again. Okay, so this right view, because it's in post-meditation time, is what gives you the ability to then communicate what you've realized in meditative equipoise to others. Okay, and so that leads to the second of the 8, right intention. So that's the motivating intention, wishing to correctly explain to others the view of selflessness realized in meditation. It is thus included in the second branch, the branch of promoting understanding in others. Okay, so first we have to affirm the understanding ourselves in post-meditation time, and then have the intention to share that with others. So having an intention of compassion, wishing to benefit others. And so that's wanting to promote the understanding in others. Okay, then the third of the 8, right speech, is speech explaining to others the right view that we have realized. Okay, so here we're acting based on right view, based on intention. We're acting to share with others the right view that we've realized. Right action refers to refraining from physical acts harmful to self and others. So clearly, when you're explaining the right view to others with right speech, you better not be punching them in the nose at the same time. Okay, you have proper action. And then right livelihood consists of procuring food, shelter, clothing, and medicine without recourse to the 5 wrong livelihoods. Okay, so as you're living as a person who's sharing the Dharma with others, then your behavior, right action, needs to be refined, and the way you procure your livelihood, your necessities for life, need to be procured in an honest way, not in a dishonest, manipulative way. Okay. So here, there's 5 wrong livelihoods. The wrong livelihoods are described in different texts differently. Yeah. So there's some similarity always between them, but then there's always some difference. Okay. So basically, one format that I was the first one that I learned was abandoning hinting to other people for what you need. Okay. Gee, yeah, it's so cold out, and I get really chilly. This jacket doesn't really keep me warm. You look like you have such a nice, warm, cozy jacket. Hint, 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 hint. Okay. Or flattery, oh, you're such a generous person. I really appreciate your generosity and how much you've taken care of me in the past. Okay. So flatter somebody. We put them in a position where they can't say no. It's a kind of manipulation or coercion. Yeah. All these other people are chipping in a little bit of money to get me a new winter blanket. Yeah? Would you like to contribute? Everybody else is chipping in $20. Yeah, will you want to contribute too? How's the person ever going to say no? Okay. Then there's giving a small present to get a big one. Yeah. Oh, here's this little Buddhist trinket I had that I want to share with you. I know you'll like it. Yeah. So I'm giving you a present. Aren't you flattered by me giving you a present? You better give one back. Okay. So here, the thing is, we're not saying here don't give people presents and don't praise them for good things they do and stuff like that. We're not talking that. We're looking at the mind, the motivation. Yeah. When we praise people because we want something out of them. Okay. When we comment on something because we want somebody to give it to us. When we put them in a position where they can't say no. When we give them a gift so that they feel obliged to give us something back. And then the fifth one is hypocrisy. Yeah. So normally we sleep late, but when our benefactor is coming, we are up bright and early. Normally we, don't make offerings on our altar because we overslept, so there's no time to make them. But our benefactor is coming, we make very nice offerings on the altar. Normally, we do our meditations kind of leaning against a pillow on the wall and, just kind of looking and turning the pages. But our benefactor comes and we're sitting upright with our dorje and bell and drum and our Tibet our text, and we're meditating like this and ringing the bell and doing the drum and looking very holy. It's very funny how we try and look holy. we have. There was one man who stayed here for some time, and he was operating the machine in the back, and so I always, I would look at his face when he was doing things, and he would be sitting there listening to teachings. Or and then sometimes we'd see him.
I can't wait.
He'd have one of the things. We did a skit about this, remember? Yeah. And he laughed at it too. So, yeah. So one time I asked him about this, because he was acting so strange. And I said, when you're listening to teachings, the proper behavior is, you sit and your hands are in your lap and you're relaxed and you look at the speaker in a relaxed way, And he said, and I said, do you have any awareness that you have very unusual expressions on your face? And he said to me, "Oh, I thought that's how we were supposed to look when we're really serious Dharma practitioners." Yeah. So he was trying to look like a serious Dharma practitioner. Yeah. Because that was his idea of what looking holy was. Of course, it looked totally weird to the rest of us. So we did the 5 wrong livelihoods. Then, right effort. exerts energy to develop the antidotes, eliminating the objects to be abandoned on the path of meditation, enabling us to advance to higher paths. Okay, so effort to develop the antidotes, that eliminate the objects to be abandoned, which are different levels of afflictions or different levels of cognitive obscurations. And then right mindfulness, our friends again, does not forget the object of meditation, thus preventing and eliminating hindrances to single-pointedness. Right concentration is the antidote to obstructions to mental absorption, unserviceability of the mind that hinders the development of concentration. Now, this is interesting, the obscurations to mental absorption. Do you remember when we were talking about what self-centeredness was? And it was, what was the kind of obscuration it was? It was put together with this obscuration of mental absorption. Yeah, okay, the obscuration of inferiority, something like that. And so it referred to self-centeredness, and it referred to obscurations to mental absorption too. That one class that came up. Okay. And then through right concentration, we're able to cultivate the super knowledges and focus on the meaning of the four truths single-pointedly. So these three concentrate the fourth branch, the branch of antidotes to opposing factors, because they overcome and purify obstructions. Okay. Now, to make these 8 go into the three higher trainings, right view and right intention are the higher training in wisdom. Right speech, action, and livelihood are the higher training in ethical conduct. Right effort, mindfulness, and concentration are higher training in concentration. So many mental factors such as mindfulness, effort, concentration, and wisdom appear repeatedly in the 37 aids, emphasizing the vital role they play in the path to liberation. The fact that they are found in different contexts illustrates not only the various situations in which they are needed, but also that their capacity and potency increase as a practitioner advances. Okay, so now I want to, that was the description of the Eightfold Path as it's explained for an Arya. Now I want to do it for ordinary beings, because this is how it's very often taught when people come into the Dharma the first time, especially in Theravada centers. Then, the Eightfold Path is what you practice. And of course, for people in the Tibetan tradition too, all these 8 are completely in accord with, everything we do as well. So here, right view, the right view that you start out with is essential to your practice. And this is the right view of karma and its effects. Yeah. So right away, if we want to practice, we have, if we want to practice, not just learn, but practice, then an understanding of karma and its effects and how they work is really important. Okay, so you study about karma. The book Good Karma, How to Create the Causes of Happiness and Avoid the Causes of Suffering, talk a lot about karma and what kind of actions produce what kind of results. So we learn that kind of thing. Then we develop a good intention. Okay, so a good intention here refers to 3 things. One is renunciation, and here renunciation applies particularly to renouncing obsession with sense objects. Yeah, because if we want to practice and maintain good karma and get anywhere, our obsession with objects of the senses has to be subdued. The second one, the second kind of intention is benevolence. So having a kind attitude towards others. Also very important if we want to be a good human being and if we want to practice. And the third part of intention is nonviolence or compassion, ahimsa. Okay, it's the same ahimsa that Gandhiji spoke about. So it's not just refraining from physical violence, but it's actually having some compassion for others. So on the basis of that right view and that right intention, then we practice ethical conduct. So right speech refers to abandoning the four non-virtues of speech, lying, divisive words, harsh words, and idle talk, and cultivating speech that is truthful, that brings people together and reconciles them, that is kind, and that is spoken at appropriate times in appropriate ways to appropriate people. Okay? And then right livelihood, the next one is right action, isn't it? Okay, so that's abandoning the three non-virtues of body. So instead of killing, protecting life, so abandoning killing and in addition protecting life, abandoning taking what hasn't been freely given to us, so stealing things, borrowing things and not returning them, and instead practicing cultivating, protecting other people's property, and to even go a step further, to be generous with our property, and then to abandon unwise and unkind sexual behavior, which chiefly refers to adultery, but also includes unsafe sex and using people just for our own pleasure without consideration of whether they're getting attached to us or not, and instead using sexuality wisely or kindly, or practicing celibacy. I remember, do you remember this situation in a Lamrim retreat at Cloud Mountain? And I was talking about, using sexuality wisely and kindly. And you said, do you remember this at all? Huh? No? Yeah, and you said, well, how do we do that? And I said, become a nun. And everybody laughed. And you took my advice after some years. So, yeah, interesting. I remember that very vividly. It's interesting you don't. Anyway. Okay. Then right livelihood, in the context of ordinary people, means procuring our wherewithal, material wherewithal to stay alive in an honest way. So for lay people, it means earning your living in an honest way. Yeah, not by shady deals, not by extortion, not by making chemicals or weapons or using chemicals, weapons to destroy people or destroy the environment. Yeah, it means earning your living in a responsible way. Hopefully that can benefit other people. And for monastics, the abandoning the 5 wrong livelihoods is very important. Then right effort, to put some effort into our Dharma practice. So instead of our Dharma practice just being a hobby, that we kind of do sometimes, to make it a real vital part of our life, and have a regular daily meditation practice. Okay, then mindfulness, so being aware of our body and how we're moving through space, being aware of what to practice and what to abandon, in our life, so we can be honest, upright people, kind people. And then concentration, developing some concentration in our meditation practice. Okay? And then, as you do those, actually, then it comes around in a full circle to right view. But here, when you come around the circle to right view now is not the understanding of karma and its effects, but the understanding of the ultimate nature of phenomena. So because you've developed the other 8, then your mind is really prepared to delve into the topic of emptiness and develop the wisdom that understands and later realizes emptiness. Okay, then the conventional and ultimate natures of the 37 aids. So the Sanskrit tradition emphasizes cultivating the 37 aids to awakening in the context of both their conventional and ultimate natures. Their conventional nature concerns how they arise and function on the path. So that's what we've just explained so far, what we've gone through so far in the chapter. For example, the 4 establishments of mindfulness see the body as unclean, feelings as unsatisfactory, the mind as impermanent, and certain phenomena to practice and others to abandon. Okay, so that's seeing the conventional nature of the 4 establishments of mindfulness. In the context of the ultimate nature, we investigate the ultimate mode of existence of the 37 aids. Now, here, if we had more time, Shantideva, in his guide to a bodhisattva's deeds, or engaging in a bodhisattva's deeds, in chapter 9, he goes through a big discussion of how to meditate on the emptiness of inherent existence of these 37 factors. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. So Shantideva discusses the 4 establishments of mindfulness from the perspective of ultimate reality, examining the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena to determine their ultimate nature, their emptiness of inherent existence. Understanding their emptiness prevents us from attributing a self to the very paths designed to liberate us. So grasping at self is the source of our samsara. So if we, these 37 aids are the path to liberate us from society, from samsara. Yeah, but if so they're designed to liberate us from samsara. But if we grasp these very paths, which are to liberate us as inherently existent, then they're not going to serve as liberating factors. So we have to see their emptiness. So actually, as you're meditating on the path, you go through all 4 of the 4 truths, and you see, like we did before, true dukkha is to be understood, true origin is to be abandoned, true cessation is to be actualized, true path is to be practiced. Yeah, that's how you relate to them on the conventional level. And then you go through and, there's true dukkha, but there's no true dukkha to understand. There's true origin, but there's no true origins to abandon. There's true cessation, but there's no true cessations to actualize. There's the true path, but there's no true path to realize, to practice. So here, when the Buddha is saying that there's no dukkha, no origin, no cessation, no path, it's like in the Heart Sutra. Okay? He doesn't mean that these things are non-existent. He's saying that there's no inherently existent dukkha or inherently existent origin, inherently existent cessation, inherently existent path. Okay? So, this comes again and again, in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, of which the Heart Sutra is an abbreviation, is everything that you're meditating on and trying to understand on a conventional level, you also have to see as not self and not having an inherent nature of its own. This is quite important. When we can do this, then we can see that all these different things function. They arise due to their own unique causes and conditions. They function to produce different results. We are able to exert effort to gaining some and enhancing some and subduing and abandoning others. Yeah, but all these things don't inherently exist. And because they are dependent arisings, they don't inherently exist. Because they are empty, they exist dependently. So you go back and forth, after you learn all these on the conventional level, then you go back and forth between, yes, they exist, but they don't exist inherently. Yes, they're empty of inherent existence, but they are dependent. So you go back and forth, so you are able to harmonize both the view of emptiness and the view of dependent arising, to see them as not contradictory. And then when you've done that, then your analysis of the profound view is complete, as J. Rinpoche says in the Three Principal Aspects of the Path. So we finished the chapter on higher training of wisdom. The next chapter is on selflessness and emptiness. This chapter is going to be a bit challenging, so we'll do our best. If we had tons of time, we would unpack everything, and really go into depth. But the idea here is to give a brief overview and to show some of the similarities and some of the differences between how the Pali and Sanskrit tradition talk about selflessness and emptiness. And I know when I was doing the research for this, I was so surprised to find different things, refutations that we find in Nagarjuna that are elaborated by Chandakirti and J. Rinpoche, and that the Tibetan monks and nuns spend years debating, are also found in the Pali scriptures. I never knew that before. And I found it just like, wow. And it really shows that, Nagarjuna was brilliant, and they say that he took the teachings and revealed a deeper level of ultimate truth than than people had understood before. So he was using many of the same arguments that were in the Pali Suttas because he knew the Pali Suttas. He was extremely learned. He used those, but he gave them a deeper meaning than people had seen before. The meaning was there, but it hadn't been fleshed out. So, when you really see this, then you begin to see how the Sanskrit tradition in many ways built upon the foundation of what's explained in the Pali Sutras. So we see these are not two unrelated, distinct traditions, They share so much in common. Okay, so correct understanding of selflessness, okay, which in the Pali tradition, they translate as not self, or non-self, or no self. This same word that's how it's translated in English. Tibetans, for one reason or another, have translated it as selfless. Okay, the problem with translating it as selfless is in English, selfless usually means very compassionate and altruistic, doesn't it? It's a very selfless person. They give of themselves selflessly. But selflessness does not have that meaning when we're talking in this context here about the ultimate nature of reality. Okay. So even the word self has different meanings in different contexts. Yeah. Primarily, but not always, in the Pali tradition, self refers to the person, the I, but not always. In the Sanskrit tradition, sometimes it refers to the person, the I. Sometimes self refers to the object of negation. So that can be very confusing if you don't know in what situation the word self means. In what situation? Yeah, what the meaning of the word self is in different contexts, okay? Because self sometimes refers to the person which exists. Sometimes it refers to inherent existence or substantial existence or true existence, which does not exist at all. Okay, so we have to be very careful when we read things and understand what the meaning is correctly. Okay, so correct understanding of selflessness or not self is essential in both the Pali and Sanskrit traditions. In the Pali tradition, insight wisdom correctly knows selflessness correctly understanding selflessness is a mundane mind because it examines mundane objects, the polluted aggregates, seeing them as impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self. So that's what I was referring to this morning. That insight wisdom, that kind of insight wisdom is called mundane because of the objects it's investigating. This insight is a precursor to the realization of nirvana, a supermundane mind that makes one an Arya. So remember we were talking about developing the realization of the three characteristics, having that breakthrough to seeing nirvana directly, and at that point becoming an Arya. Okay. In the Sanskrit tradition, when insight wisdom directly realizes subtle selflessness, it becomes an Arya supermundane mind capable of eradicating afflictions. Both traditions employ reasoning to arrive at the correct understanding of selflessness and translate this understanding into experience through meditating with the union of serenity and insight. Okay. Now, I'm not an expert on Chan Buddhism, and Chan Buddhism, I do know in China, is different from Chan Buddhism or Zen in Japan. Yeah, when you read the teachings, how they've been interpreted later on, there's some difference there. And it seems to me, but I can't really say. The path to how you develop serenity in Chan is very clear. It's I have a friend who is who teaches Chan Buddhism. He's from Taiwan. And I was in his temple one time, and he was teaching the 9 stages of sustained attention from Maitreya's text, just the same as we learn in the Tibetan tradition. So that whole way of developing serenity, same as what we practice. In Japan, I'm not sure how they do that. Yeah. I need to learn more about it, but it seems to me from talking to some of my friends who practice Soto Zen, is that it's a practice of just sitting, and you don't have a lot of instructions about what to practice, what to abandon. You've practiced Chan, you're nodding your head in agreement, okay? Yeah, so it's a different kind of approach there. So in the Pali Suttas, the Buddha examines not self using many schemas. So this is very interesting. As you go through the Pali Sutras, in different sutras, he'll use these different schemas to analyze, if something is or is not the self meaning the person. And here, it's often referring to the, whether it is or is not the self. Here, actually, it refers to the object of negation too, because in the early sutras, the Buddha was very focused on refuting the existence of a permanent, partless, independent, blissful self that was held by the Brahmins and later the Hindus. Okay, so this is an Atman that in some way is similar to the Christian idea of soul, but not exactly in all aspects. Okay, so it's some kind of soul or self that is permanent. Yeah, it doesn't change from life to life. It's eternal and it continues from one life to the next, but it doesn't change. And that is the person. And it doesn't have parts. It's one unified thing that is permanent. Okay. And it also doesn't have causes. Or maybe Brahma created it or God created it. But aside from that, it's not influenced by causes. It doesn't have effects. It's permanent. It's one monolithic thing. And in the Hindu sense, it is blissful. Okay? So this is the self that was widely believed in at the Buddha's time, that he spent numerous sutras refuting the existence of this kind of self. Okay? And in the centuries that followed, a lot of the debates in India, I was saying the other day, between the non-Buddhists and the Buddhists, revolve around, is there an Atman, or this kind of self or soul, or is there not? Okay? And it's still an alive debate today. Okay. So, so the Buddha used these many different schemas, and it's quite interesting when you read the Pali Suttas. The Buddha, he was quite a debater and a discusser, already right there, because he would go sometimes and, when he was doing his walking meditation or walking to or from town for alms, he would meet groups of other wanderers, spiritual practitioners, and sit down and talk with them and say, well, what do you think about this? Or what were you talking about? Or sometimes these different wanderers or Brahmins would come to the Buddha. And, because he was renowned as a very astute, wise leader, as a liberated person, and they would ask him questions, and then he would, discuss with them about these different things. So he used these different kind of schemas or formats in different sutras to investigate how the person actually existed and how it didn't exist. Okay, so one of the schemas is the 3 characteristics. And that's used to cultivate insight wisdom, knowing the aggregates are not the self. So here, in some of the sutras, the Buddha would say, the body is not the self. Feelings are not the self. Discriminations are not the self. Miscellaneous factors are not the self. Consciousness is not the self. Okay? So he would go into that. So there you see right away, if you've studied in the Tibetan tradition, the refutation of the relationship between the aggregates and the self. Are they one or are they different? Yeah, because we likewise go through that. Is the body the person? Are the feelings the person? Okay, so you can see the roots right there. Another root is the schema of the 4 truths. So that's employed to examine samsaric phenomena's specific nature, the condition for their arising and cessation. So when it talks about samsaric phenomena, it chiefly means the psychophysical aggregates that compose the person. So it would he would discuss, their nature, the conditions for arising, and their cessation, and the Noble Eightfold Path is the path to that cessation. That was another way he would investigate how, whether things were the self or not. He also investigates samsaric phenomena in terms of gratification, danger, and freedom. Okay? Or in terms of disenchantment, dispassion, and deliverance. So these are all ways that he looks at samsaric phenomena. And they mostly, in many ways, come back to seeing the 3 characteristics. Okay? Because if the aggregates are impermanent in the nature of dukkha, and, just those 2 things alone, then they certainly aren't a blissful, permanent, partless, independent person. Okay? Because impermanent aggregates are not going to be a permanent soul or person. Yeah. If they're the nature of dukkha, they're not going to be blissful. Okay? So he uses these different schema to illustrate that. Okay? So here's what it says in the next sentence. Using these different schemas, meditators investigate the 5 aggregates, the 18 constituents, 6 elements, 6 sources, and their 6 objects, 6 consciousnesses, and so forth. So these are all the things that compose samsara. Okay? To determine that they are not mine, not I, and not myself. So the Buddha will look at all these different things and then say, is that mine? Or he would be discussing with somebody, is that yours? Is that you? Is that yourself? And ask that person to, really look inside and see. So while the Sanskrit tradition presents the view of selflessness of several tenet systems, here we deal specifically with the Madhyamaka view, and within that, the view of the Prasangika Madhyamakas, according to Tsongkhapa's presentation. This is a view indicated by the word Madhyamaka in the following chapters. So this chapter looks at some of the schemas shared by both the Pali tradition and the Madhyamaka school. Okay, so examination of the relationship between the self and the aggregates, the 6 elements, and the four possible modes of arising. So this relationship between the self and aggregates, are they one? Are they different? The 6 elements, this came in Nagarjuna's Precious Garland, when he said the person is not earth, not water, not fire, not wind, not space, not consciousness. Okay, we went through that verse. And then the 4 possible modes of arising, which is found in the Pali tradition. Do things arise from self, from other, both, or neither? Neither meaning causelessly. In the next chapter, we will look at dependent arising, a signature feature of the Buddhist teachings found in all Buddhist traditions and schools. Okay, so let's start first with the Pali tradition and the relationship between the self and the aggregates. So the word self has various meanings. One is reflexive, as when the Buddha says you must train yourself. Another indicates the person, because the aggregates of a person are present, the person exists, and we say, I walk, I think. These 2 meanings of self are acceptable conventionally. We say, I have to train myself. We say, I walk, I think. Nothing wrong with those usages of the word self. However, to assert a self that is a substantial personal identity, an enduring subject at the core of the aggregates, that is mistaken. Okay, so this is the kind of self that is being refuted. A substantial personal identity, an enduring subject at the core of the aggregates. We'll get into a little more description of that self as we go. The ancient Indian conception of self, Atta or Atman, is of a permanent, eternal, and intrinsically blissful self. This self is the master of the aggregates and is able to accomplish its wishes without depending on anything else. Apart from philosophy, so that's the philosophical view, okay? If we look at our ordinary ingrained view of the self, okay, our ordinary ingrained view of ourselves either identifies the body or mind as self or thinks a self stands in some relation to the aggregates. Okay, this self appears to be an unchanging entity, enduring through time. It is one indivisible whole thing that lacks parts. It is self-sufficient, existing by its own power, independent of causes and conditions. It is in control of and has mastery over the aggregates. So when you look inside, okay, what is your feeling of self? And, when you ask yourself this question at different times, you're going to get slightly different answers. Yeah, because one time you were focusing on, well, I'm a permanent entity. And sometimes it's, I'm an eternal entity. I change a little bit, my body and mind change, but I am eternal. Yeah, and sometimes our sense of self is more, I control my body and mind. I'm in charge of this show. Yeah? Isn't it? Any control freaks here? Yeah? Some of us, we like to control everything, of not only our body and mind. We want to control the rest of the world, okay? And make everybody and everything the way we want it. But we especially feel with our own body and mind that there's a controller here. Yeah, I'm the one who decides to stand up. I'm the one who decides to sit down. I can will things to happen. I notice, for myself, my excuse for having very little concentration is I just haven't tried hard enough. If I willed myself, I would have concentration. Yeah? This idea of, there's a self that if I willed it, then I would try hard enough, and by next Tuesday, I would have some substantial concentration, independent of other causes and conditions. My will alone can make me concentrate. Can your will alone make you concentrate? We try. We're sitting there meditating. You're often thinking about carrots. Yeah. Are we having carrot soup or carrot cake? Oh, I'm distracted. I am bringing my mind back to the object of meditation, the visual image of the Buddha. Okay, I'm on the Buddha. Yeah. Oh, okay. I am going to stay awake. Oh, I'm wandering. Okay, so you see that, we have this thing, like there's a big me who should be able to control it and make us concentrate and have samadhi if we just willed it strong enough. Yeah, and this develops a whole lot of frustration in our meditation practice. Okay, I think it's the source of what the Tibetans call lung, because we're trying to will things, and there's no person there that can will it. Yeah, we feel like there's a substantially existent person that is in control, but there isn't. Yeah, so we try and will it, and we can't. Yeah, because we're not paying attention to causality. If we thought that, developing my ability to concentrate depends on a causal practice, then we would remember what the 5 hindrances are and remember what the 5 faults are. And we would apply the various antidotes to these things, realizing that we have to apply the antidotes again and again and create familiarity with all of these things, and then slowly our ability to stay on the object of meditation will increase. Okay, so if we think about causes and conditions, we can go about generating things, in a practical way. But if we have this sense that I just have to just try myself and try harder and will myself, we get so frustrated. Yeah, because we can't do it. And there's no big I that can control the body and mind. If there were, we could keep ourselves from getting old. We could keep ourselves from getting sick. We could keep ourselves from dying if there were a controller self that could control everything that happened to the aggregates. But we can't, because the body, depends on causes and conditions, and it changes due to causes and conditions. Okay, so such a self, this substantially existent self, is an illusion. If it existed, there should be no conflict between what we want ourselves to be and what we are. Would there? Because we should be able to control it. I want myself to be thin. I want myself to gain weight. Yeah, we should be able to control it. Furthermore, what can be identified as such a self? Yeah? The polluted aggregates appropriated due to ignorance and craving are impermanent and unsatisfactory in nature. They clearly are not suitable to be regarded as this is mine, this I am, this is myself. Okay? Because they're impermanent, they're afflicted. Okay, so they're not going to be some kind of perfect self as imagined by the non-Buddhist schools. Dhammadina Bhikkhuni explains how the view of personal identity, that's how I'm translating the Tibetan term jigta, which is often translated in Tibetan as view of the perishing aggregates or view of the transitory collection. But I think personal identity, it gives you more feeling for what it is, okay? So she explains how this view of personal identity arises in relation to the aggregates. So she says, an untaught ordinary person regards form or the body as self, or self as possessed of form, or form as in self, or self as in form. He regards feelings, in these four ways, discriminations in these four ways, volitional factors or miscellaneous factors in these ways, and consciousness as self, or self as possessed of consciousness, or consciousness as is in self, or self as in consciousness. Okay? So there are four positions with respect to each of the five aggregates. So there's 20 wrong views of self. And the commentaries use the relationship between the self and the body or form to explain these. By the way, these positions, you might remember one of the verses in Precious Garland resembles these, except he added another one to it. Okay? But this whole thing that the body is the self, the self possesses the body depends on the self depends on the body, and then there's often another one, which is the self and body are totally unrelated. In the verse in Precious Garland, it's the body and the self are related like fire and fuel. They're indivisible. In the Karikas, Nagarjuna, the last element is explained differently. How is it? Maybe that's where he puts different. I can't remember exactly. I should. There should be a controller self that should remember, independent of causes and conditions. Since there are four possible positions with respect to each of the five aggregates, there are 20 wrong views of self. The commentaries use the relationship between the self and the body or form to explain these. So here's the first one. Regarding the body as self is like regarding the flame of an oil lamp as identical to the color of that flame. Is the flame identical to the color of the flame? No. Okay, so that is explaining, the body as self. If we see the body as being the self, it's like saying the flame is identical to the color. It's not. They're related, but they're not identical. Okay, the second one, regarding the self as possessing the body, is like regarding a tree as possessing its shadow. Does a tree own its shadow? No, the shadow is a separate thing, but it looks like the tree owns the shadow. Okay? So that's like the self as possessing the body. Yeah. They're different, but there's a relationship. Third, regarding the body as being in the self is like regarding the scent as being in the flower. At first, it seems like the scent is in the flower, isn't it? But you can smell the scent when the flower's over there. So the scent can't be in the flower, but it kind of looks like it is. Yeah? So that's like seeing form as in the self. And then the fourth one, regarding the self as being in the body, is like regarding a jewel in a box. Okay? So here the meaning is if there's a jewel in the box, they're different and they can be separated and looked at identically or differently. You can investigate the jewel, you can investigate the box. Okay, so that's like the self that was the self inside the body, thinking that, again, they're related, but you can look at the self different from the body, but the self somehow in the body. A fifth possible relationship between the self and the aggregates is that the self is entirely different from and unrelated to the aggregates. Yeah, so they're two completely different things. They don't have any relationship. So Dhammadina does not mention this because she is speaking to a lay Buddhist who already understands there is no self distinct from the aggregates. Okay, so these 5 positions are condensed into 2. The self is the same as the aggregates or some aspect of the body-mind complex, or the self and the aggregates are completely different and unrelated. Okay, so is it completely one and identical with the aggregates, or is it completely separate from the aggregates? Yeah. In the latter case, the self would be findable as a separate entity, either inside the collection of aggregates, behind them, or as their invisible owner. Okay? So, if the aggregates were the self, okay, so if they were completely identical, because the aggregates being the self means that one or more of the aggregates has to be the self, which would mean it would do the exact same things as the self. Okay? So, if the aggregates were the self, one or all of them would have the 4 attributes of a real self. So that self should be permanent, but the aggregates are impermanent. So that doesn't work. The self should be an indivisible whole, but there are 5 aggregates, each of which consists of many components. Okay? The self should be self-sufficient and independent of causes and conditions, yet the aggregates are conditioned and dependent on causes and conditions. So they can't be one and the same. The self should be in control, but the aggregates cannot be controlled and are simply processes with no supervisor managing them. Does that give you this feeling of, what are you talking about? Yeah? Does that give you a weird feeling? The aggregates are simply processes with no supervisor managing them. Now, what are you talking about? This is my body. It's not a process. My mind is a thing. It's not a process. And there's me who's supervising and managing them. Yeah? Do you have that kind of gut reaction even when you read this? It's like, no, this can't be true. Yeah? But a controlling self should be able to stop the body from aging and stop the mind from experiencing painful feelings. If there were a controlling self, it should be able to do this. Can we stop our body from aging? Can we stop our mind from having painful feelings? These are conditioned processes that we can't will. Okay. The aggregates have none of the characteristics of a true self, and in fact have the opposite characteristics. Yeah, the true self should be permanent, the aggregates are impermanent. True self should be blissful, the aggregates are suffering, things like this. So here's another way in which they have the opposite characteristics. So this is, the following is referring to a verse in the Pali Suttas that in the Samyutta Nikaya, I think it's called the Ball of Foam Sutta, and it's often quoted in Tibetan commentaries, showing that the Madhyamaka view exists within the fundamental vehicle suttas. Okay, so the body is like a ball of foam, lacking any substance. Think of your body. It's like a ball of foam. But, there's foam. There's no substance in foam. It looks like there's something there, but there's nothing there. Feelings are like bubbles, arising and breaking up quickly. If we really do mindfulness on our feelings diligently, we see any pleasurable, unpleasurable, neutral feeling going like this, not staying around for long, like bubbles. Discriminations are like a mirage, appearing but not found when searched for. So we discriminate all sorts of phenomena. This is that. Okay, but these discriminations, where are they? They're like a mirage. They appear to be there, but we can't put our finger on them. Volitional factors or miscellaneous factors are like the hollow trunk of a plantain tree. So these are a certain kind of banana trees. It looks like there's a trunk, but when you try to get to the core of the trunk, there's no core, because it actually isn't a trunk. It's just the sheaves of the bananas that are bundled up there. Okay. Consciousness is like a magical illusion, appearing but lacking any substance. There is no core in any of the aggregates. So there we're talking about the self. There's selflessness of person. Okay? They are empty of any independent, substantial essence. Okay. The Buddha analyzed the 6 internal sources, the 6 external sources, the 6 consciousnesses, 6 types of contact, 6 feelings, and 6 cravings. All of these arise and cease. If they were the self would have to rise and cease as well. But a substantial self cannot do that. A permanent eternal self cannot arise and cease like that. Nagarjuna uses a similar refutation. This is in the Karikas. If the aggregates were the self, then the self would be subject to arising and disintegration. He then explains that if any of the aggregates were the self would begin at conception and end at death, just as the aggregates of this life do. In that case, memory of previous lives and the experiencing of karmic effects in later lives would be impossible. So this is a refutation that Tsongkhapa elaborates on in the Lamrim Chenmo. Okay. So what it's meaning here is when we're born, we have the 5 human aggregates. When we die, our 5 human aggregates cease, and we appropriate the 5 aggregates of whatever rebirth it is in the next life. Okay? So we have different aggregates in different lives. But this doesn't mean that these aggregates are inherently different and unrelated. The physical body, yes, is totally different in one life than in the next. But the aggregates from one life to the next, the mental aggregates, there's a continuity. Okay? But they're not the same. We have human aggregates now. Who knows what kind of aggregates we'll have in the next life? Maybe God realm aggregates, maybe human aggregates, maybe preta or animal aggregates. Okay, so the aggregates of each lifetime are different, even though there's a continuity there. In the same way that the self of each lifetime is different, even though there's a continuity of the self. Yeah. Who we are in this lifetime, yeah, okay, children. Next lifetime, is children going to exist? No, children goes out of existence when this body and this mind separate. Okay. There is the continuity of the general I. Okay. But children has a beginning and has an end. Yeah. What's interesting is we say children was born. But on September 18th, 1950, children was not born. Yeah, if you told my parents, if you told my mother at that time that she delivered children, she would say no. Yeah, I delivered Cheryl. Children didn't exist at the time I was born. But we say children was born at a certain time. Yeah. So what we're getting at here is how things depend on being designated. And these designations are flexible and they're kind of sloppy sometimes, and we can't pinpoint things. Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, especially if you have a different name now than you did when you were born. Yeah, your mother didn't say, I just had so-and-so. Yeah, or your parents didn't say, I raised so-and-so using your ordained name. Yeah, but they certainly raised you. So does that mean that they didn't raise us? Because conventionally we say our parents raised us. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we're talking about things that exist by mere designation. Yeah. So did Cheryl stop at the time I was ordained? Yeah. If you ask my parents, did Cheryl cease at the time I was ordained? They would say no. If you ask the government, did Cheryl cease when I was ordained? They would also say no, because I didn't change my legal name. You know, when children came into existence, Cheryl did not cease. Yeah, are Cheryl and children the same? Not exactly. Are they related? Yes. Okay. So this is interesting, we're getting into this whole topic of how things exist by imputation. Okay, let's see if we can I'm going to go over, but in order to get to a good stopping point. Okay, the Buddha clearly refutes a self that controls the aggregates. When the non-Buddhist wander, Givavasana, says the 5 aggregates are the self, the Buddha challenges him, asking if a king exercises power in his realm to punish people who deserve punishment. Agivasana responds positively. The Buddha then asks him if he can exercise power over any of his 5 aggregates, such that he can make them be what he wants. Agitasana remains silent. He understands that if a controller self existed, it should be able to make the aggregates do and be what it wished. Clearly, this is not the case, because we cannot prevent our body from aging or subdue our emotions by wishing them away. The Buddha explains why none of the aggregates are the self. First, since the aggregates lead to affliction, they are in the nature of dukkha, unsatisfactory. Something in the nature of dukkha is not suitable to be a permanent, eternal, blissful self. Yeah. Second, similar to the previous refutation, if one of the aggregates were the self, we should be able to control that aggregate and make it do or be what we want. But we cannot tell ourselves what to feel. Feelings arise dependent on their own conditions. Although we may believe there is a self that is a commander of the aggregates, in fact, no controlling self exists. Although there is no independent self that controls the aggregates, accomplished meditators are able to control and direct their minds. Because you see, if there's no controller of the aggregates, then who makes decisions? Who makes choices? What is the person? Okay? So we say accomplished meditators are able to control and direct their minds, but they do that without the existence of there being a substantial self, a real self. They do so, how? Dependent on causes and conditions. Training their minds through diligent practice, they create the causes for virtuous mental states to arise and for mental factors such as mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom to be strong. While there is no controlling self that can will us to attain awakening, nurturing constructive thoughts and emotions and applying antidotes to destructive ones will bring this result. Okay? So the meditator meditates, but there's no truly existent meditator. If the self, on the other hand, were totally distinct from the aggregates, it would be a separate entity lying behind the aggregates. However, when we identify anything that the self does, such as walking or thinking, we see only the aggregates doing those actions. No separate substantial self lying behind the aggregates directing the show can be identified. So it's not like in The Wizard of Oz. Remember when Dorothy goes in and meets the wizard? I am the powerful Wizard of Oz. It looked so real, this colors flashing, the real Wizard of Oz, And it looked like there was a substantial self behind that, operating everything. What was behind that? Some little old man and his dog, Toto went behind and took the curtain away and saw the little old man. There was no real self there. We should watch The Wizard of Oz sometimes and look at it through a Dharma sense. There's a lot there. I mean, her whole experience when, she was unconscious seemed so real, and the whole thing was unreal, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay. Where were we? In short, no inner nucleus Yeah, in short, no inner nucleus of selfhood can be found within or distinct from the conventional person made up of the 5 aggregates. Birth, rebirth, and results of karma occur without an enduring self. Each moment of experience, each moment of body and mind, is connected to its predecessors and its successors through a causal process. We identify ourselves as the same person from birth to death and beyond because there is a causal continuity, not because there is a substantial self that holds everything together. When Tsongkhapa gets into this in more depth, he shows that if there were a substantial self, the causal process of karma producing results could not function. Because if there were a substantial self, you should be able to find it, and it wouldn't change. In that case, if a substantial self is permanent, how can it change to create causes, create karma? And how could those causes then produce a result? Because any process of creating causes and causes producing results depends on change, on things being impermanent. Okay? So in that way, he refutes inherent existence. Okay. How about, we've already gone over time. Should we stop? 1, 2 questions. Okay, yeah. So when we say that there's no self working towards enlightenment, it makes us feel like, well, how can we ever get enlightened? Because there has to be a me who decides to get enlightened. Okay? But if we try and find who is that me, if such a me existed, we should be able to identify what it is. Is it your body? No. Is it your mind? Well, maybe. Okay, so which mind is it? Is it your visual consciousness that wants to get enlightened? What about your auditory consciousness? Olfactory, gustatory, tactile consciousness? Oh, mental consciousness. Mental consciousness wants to get enlightened. Which mental consciousness? The one that's sleeping, the one that's awake, the one that's in a coma, the one that's getting born, the one that's dying. Which mental consciousness? The one from yesterday, the one from today? Oh, it must be the one from today. That means the one from yesterday didn't want to get enlightened. It's just today's mental consciousness. So which mental consciousness from today? The mental consciousness right now? Well, that moment when I snap my fingers is now that past. So if that was the mental consciousness that wanted to get enlightened, then there's no consciousness that wants to get. If that mental consciousness were the self, then right now, since that mental consciousness has ceased, there would be no self wanting to get enlightened right now. Is it the mental consciousness that's just the mental consciousness that perceives mental objects? Or does it have other mental factors with it? Yeah. Can the mental consciousness without any mental factors perceive an object? Without contact and intention and attention and feeling and discrimination? No, it can't. It needs to have those different mental factors. So then is the self one of those mental factors? Which one? Which instant of that mental factor? So you see, if there is something, a real self that wants to get enlightened, you have to be able to pinpoint it. But when we start investigating everything it possibly could be, we can't put our finger on it. Okay? And yet somehow, without there being a controller, everything still functions. Isn't that amazing? Without having, a God or a big self or something like that, everything still functions. How does it function? Dependence, factors depending on each other, causes and conditions coming together, producing things that are impermanent, that disintegrate, that become different results. You have this incredible just causality. So we do say, I'm striving for enlightenment, right? We do say that. I want to get enlightened. So we went through this whole negation process, trying to find some real self that wants to get enlightened. We can't find a real self that wants to do it. But we say, I want to get enlightened. And everybody understands it. It must have some meaning. So what is that self that wants to get enlightened? Okay, that is the self that exists by being merely designated independence upon the body and mind. But that self is changing every moment because the body and mind is changing. And when you look for what that self is, you can't find it because it's just merely designated. There's nothing that lies behind it, but it's also not non-existent. Yeah, we are. Physical and mental processes. Yeah, without anybody pressing the on switch or pressing the off switch. Yeah. We think that there's a me that's thinking, but who in the world is thinking? Yeah, can you find an I that's thinking? And yet, we say somebody's thinking. It's not that there's nobody thinking, but when you look for the person who's thinking, you cannot find it. But that doesn't mean it is non-existent. It just means you can't find it when searching for it with ultimate analysis. Doesn't mean it's non-existent.